Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today, we're doing another installment of the weekly meta breakdown where we look at the top performing decks on the MTG Arena ladder. This particular video will be for the standard best of 3 format. If you're looking for standard best of 1 or the other formats on Arena, Historic Explorer, best of 1, best of 3, check out the playlist. We try to cover them weekly. And we get the data as always from UntapedGG, what you see on the screen. Companion tool that runs alongside Arena Client, tracks win rate, loss rates, whole bunch of cool functionality. Link is in the video description. If you want to get started with them today, you can track your own win rates as well. And for this week as well, we are going to be covering, there's a 100+ person tournament, the PizzaBox Open this past weekend. I commentated on the top 8, but there's some good spread of decks and meta analysis there as well. So I'll link that. That's a free-to-play tournament that happens 3 times a month with cash prizes. The one thing folks have asked for is kind of a holistic overview of the meta before we jump into the specific decks. So it's something we're trying out. Still kind of new in the approach, so let me know what you think in the comments of adding this into the weekly series. So we are looking, in this particular case, I am bound by a 1 month period. We're looking Platinum to Mythic rank. I'm less concerned with win rate today, but because it's just a singular data point, but I'm more at this point looking at the popularity of decks. And what we're trying to do here is compare popularity to see if there's a correlation between, are the popular decks also winning or just people playing potentially bad decks that aren't putting up the same types of win results. This is something we want to try out here. So if we look at the week or the last month, and then we look specifically for today, what people are playing on the ladder, Dimir Midrange is actually the top in terms of popularity. So Dimir's come out of like left field, and we're going to feature 2 different versions. From ladder play, and then a 3rd version that made it to the finals of the PizzaBox Open. So Dimir, so hot right now. And then we have kind of our decks that we see very close at 10% of the meta, 5-color domain, which is like the Atraxa ramp decks. We have Esper Legends. Interestingly, we have Esper Control. So this is something we're going to take a look at because it didn't even come up in my win rates of things like over 55%. But it's being played at 7.5% of the meta right now. Azorius Control, a couple different versions of that. Selesnya Enchantments, quite popular, but another deck that's not really putting up the win rate to even kind of come up in my results. Mono Red Aggro, Mono White Humans as kind of your aggro decks to round it up. So, like I mentioned, we are looking at a population of 38,000 games of best of 3 from Platinum to Mythic rank for the last week of data, June 5th to now. And we're going to look at 2 Dimir decks. So they're not concurrent in terms of the win rates, but I wanted to kind of compare and contrast them. So this deck here has got a 71% win rate over 120 matches, and it's kind of a mid-range card draw Planeswalker package. So this one here, you have Fairy Mastermind, which when your opponent draws an extra card for their turn, you get to draw a card. You can also pump mana, so you can kind of get pseudo burn damage with Sheoldred. Your Tenacious Underdog can come back from the graveyard. You got Lilies in here. Kaidos is another way to draw extra cards with the Evasive Threat. The Flash package is nice here because you can either counter their spell, kill their thing, or flash in the Fairy Mastermind. You also have access to like Urtai as another flash threat on the top end. This allows, so if you have Fairy Mastermind out, the Urtai can counter something on your opponent's turn, and then force them to draw, so then you get an extra draw as well. Trespasser for Graveyard Hate life gain. We have Kaido Dancing Shadow for some more card advantage, and kind of a creature token theme. Like you can make some creature tokens with it, and then you can also fog one of your opponent's creatures in a way they can't attack or block until your next turn. And then Big Teferi on the top end. A couple copies of Myrex. Myrex, over the course of the weekend, when I was doing the commentary, really kind of was one of the big cards of the format. Just in these grindy matchups, people are throwing away resources. A lot of the matches go long. You have Myrex kind of grinding out you incremental value. Your sideboard's got like extra removal and cut down, Sheoldred's Edict, Malicious Malfunction as a sweeper. You have counter spells kind of tucked away in here, Duress for hand hate, more Trespasser for life gain and graveyard hate. Phyrexian Arena for the grindier matchups, and another Sheoldred as well for the decks that just kind of get stonewalled by Sheoldred. So there's that version of the list. Then there's also this mid-rangey version, 60%. So still a relatively good win rate. 460 games, so more games played with this one. Very similar kind of concepts. You got some Spell Pierce in here, varied amounts, so more removal, got Scatter Ray in here. This version's playing Invasion of Amonkhet to reanimate. You still have the Urkai Shieldred package, but a little bit heavier on the Planeswalkers, going with Sorin over the other Kaido, and then 2 Teferis on that end. No copies of the Myrex in this version. I'd probably play Myrex in this. Sideboard, you have Duress, Disdainful Stroke Negate, like we mentioned. Parasitic Grasp is good against the aggressive decks. A lot of the mono red creatures, incidentally, happen to be humans, or some number. Life gain's decent against mono white humans, obviously a really good effect. You have Razor Slash for the grindier matchups with like a lot of non-basics. Glistening Deluge for the green-white matchups, mostly the white matchups, because green matchups don't really exist. But I guess against Herd Migration, this can hit it, so that's an interesting inclusion. And then Whack as just a targeted removal spell for white creatures. So kind of interesting, kind of different takes. We then go to mono white humans, which is just a shade over 60%. So kind of similar to the best of 1 version, but given in best of 3, the games tend to be more mid-range focused. We're seeing a little bit more in terms of like Invasion of Gobukan to be a tax effect for your opponents. Cards, you also have Soul Partition to give you a few more main board answers to resolve the Traxa. Shaving down a copy of Thalia, just given that it does get taxed by this, but you got your 8 1-drop humans in here. You got your Skrull for protection. Coppercoat Vanguard gives pseudo protection in terms of ward, plus a bonus in terms of attackers. Adeline is kind of your snowbally effect, plays really nice with Coppercoat since your creature tokens become 2/1s. Brutal Cathar, your other piece of removal. Not as good against, like, you don't want to exile necessarily their Atraxa for them to kill your Brutal Cathar and then get more card draw out of it. And then Knight Errant of Eos is your card advantage engine. Going with Mishra's Foundry in this deck. So you have Surge of Salvation for black-based removal, Ossification for... Don't bring in Ossification for the ramp matchup, I find. If you have to in a pinch, but the thing is they have like a bunch of ways to blow up the enchantments or just play like their Leyline Bindings. So then it ends up just, you reset their big threats. Licensors for Graveyard Hate, you have Extraction Specialist for heavy removal matchups, you return your creatures. Lauren for Artifact Enchantment base, Archangel Elspeth, Wandering Emperor for like the controlling matchups, heavy sweepers, and then Elish Norn's really good against the ramp matchup. Shuts off Atraxa card draw, shuts off Atali, shuts off all the ETB enchantment removals. So it's kind of a consideration there. We then go to Esper Legends, same win rate, 60.8. So this is pretty much the stock list at this point. There are usually like some number of trims along the edges. So we're seeing a Lauren in the main board, just down to 2 Ronas, more tax effect with Thalia, the full 4 of Shieldred, 2 Urtais. So you see this number kind of fluctuate as well. But core of this deck is you play a bunch of Legends to take advantage of Plaza Heroes. You play Rafine to kind of churn through those duplicate copies and then have a big powerful board. Very strong starts are like Skrelv into Thalia into Rafine, where you kind of tax and lock out your opponent. Cut downs for removal, Surge for protection, Destroy Level for big things or enchantments, Disdainful Stroke for the big mana decks, Gobukan as attacks, kind of think of Pseudo Thoughtseize, Negate for the big mana decks, Lauren for Artifact Enchantment Hate, and Gix Command as a sweeper plus life gain. We then go to 5-color domain. So this was very similar to the list that won the PizzaBox Open. So this is your ramp deck. We're seeing some copies of Asuza in this one, just give you another additional way to kind of get ahead on mana. Also gains you some life. But the core of this deck is get lands into play, search up lands with Herd Migration, sweep up your opponent's board, drop a Traxa or a Tali, take over the game. You have Archangel of Wrath to deal with your opponent's creatures, gain your life, and kind of stonewall those more aggressive decks. So it's pretty much a green-white deck, but you're playing the other colors for Traxa and Atali through either Triomes or searching basics through like Herd Migration, Topiary Stomper, or Invasion of Zendikar. Barrage for blue and white things, Disdainful Stroke and Negate for big mana decks. Against the counterspell heavy decks, you bring in Howlpack Piper that cheats into play some of your big creatures. You also have Tyrannix Rex, so kind of a anti-control package. Like Atali's not great against, say, like blue-white control, so you bring in these cards here. And then another sweeper and Vanquish the Horde for the go wide decks. You then go to Mono Red Aggro 60.3. So this has been fairly stock at this point, 23 lands, which is a reasonable amount for this deck. People like to skimp because it's mono red, but you are playing 4 drops, and then Bloodthirsty does want to get you to 5 mana. This version's got the Furnace Punishers to potentially punish those greedier mana bases, so things like Esper Legends. Even with these Dimir lists, how many basics? So still 11, 10, so they still have a good number of basics kind of hiding out in there. So this card has probably seen a reduction in terms of effectiveness given the move away from like the Rakdos midrange decks, stuff like that. Maybe squeeze a little bit better, just being another haste creature. But you have your burn package, Swiftspear. This deck's just really looking to punish your opponent for missing a beat at any point. Barrage for blue or white things, Bolt as just more removal, Chandras and Koths for kind of a more planeswalker package for heavy sweepers, and then Rending Flame to deal with like the Sheoldreds or the bigger creatures. What some of the decks have been doing is playing Furnace Rains or like the Yoink style effects, take control of like the creatures, and so it's just a way to kind of get rid of Atraxa. Once an Atraxa resolves, you're going to have a probable hard time dealing with it with this configuration. Then go to Mono White Midrange, 58%. So this one's going with a heavier Planeswalker package. You got Archangel Elspeth to make tokens, life gain, reanimate some of your smaller things if you need to. Emperor tokens, pump up power, exile removal. Elspeth finds you a whole bunch of permanents. Sunfall in here. So this one's a little bit more controlling. We have Farewell and Sunfall. Sometimes you see Sarah Paragon, which will be a list that we see from PizzaBox Open that I believe top forward, kind of mixed into there. Sarah Paragon plays nicely with Invasion. You get to recast it even after you sack it, but a lot of removal, lay down arms, ossification, restoration, farmhand, both find you basics. So even though your curve's pretty high on 6 drops, you have a number of ways to pull out lands from your deck. In terms of your sideboard, Destroy Evil for enchantments or big things. Another Gobokan is tax effects. Graveyard Hates, taxing effects for like bigger mana decks. Knockout Blow for mono red or the aggressive decks. Lauren for artifact enchantments. And then Elish Norn. There's like every other Elspeth in this deck. But Elish Norn is for the ramp decks, anything with a lot of enter the battlefield style effects. Then the last ladder deck we're going to be covering today is Blue-White Control. This deck's got a couple different variations in terms of how it can be constructed. We'll look at another version that did well and went to the finals, was unbeaten during the Swiss, made it all the way to the finals and lost in the finals, or the semis, in terms of Blue-White Control. But we're seeing like Wash Away, which is an interesting inclusion here. Don't think I love this card, but interesting to see it here. Syncopates, basically just like counterspells draw. Your win conditions are Wandering Emperor to Fairy, Eternal Wander, a bunch of sweepers, Thirst for Discoveries, kind of the new addition to the deck that you're seeing in some numbers. Little risky into Sheoldred, but seeing that, you'll notice with the mana base, there's triomes here. This is because they're dual lands that have the basic subtext, Forest Plains Island, the plains being the notable for lay down arms. In terms of your sideboard, you got counters, Graveyard Hate. In the kind of mid-rangey matchups, you could bring in the Chrome Host, Seed Shark. Main board, their removal doesn't really do much, so they take it out. Then you bring the Seed Shark in. Another sweeper in Depopulate. Against aggressive deck, you have the Angel that could come in. And then just sweepers. And then against counter spells, you have Hullbreaker Horror. One thing before you jump to Pizza Box, I want to see what these Esper lists are all about. Okay, so like 50% insufficient data, so just kind of weird configurations. So we see some with like Siphon Insight in there. All right, not enough data to really do anything conclusive here, so we're just going to skip that. So pivoting over to PizzaBox Open, there was 113 participants. If we skim over the distribution of decks, and I'll link this as well, Esper Legends was the most representative, but seeing as past tournaments, nothing broke 10% of the field, which is quite nice. Usually in the past with Rakdos, we'd see this in the 20 to 30% range for Rakdos decks. But like Esper Legends, 50%, 51% win rate. Azorius Control, 55. Mono Red, 44. Rakdos midrange, people are still trying to believe, 34%. Esper midrange, 43. The Atraxa decks, 74% win rate. Dimir midrange, 61. The Control version, not as well. Interesting, like Mono White, the Humans decks just kind of got beat up in this tournament. So maybe more efficient on the latter, but folks in this format are going with kind of these more mid-range piles. And kind of correlated, we're seeing a lot of these 5-color ramp decks do well. Mono Green, someone was brave enough, 16%. But if we look at the list themselves, you can see the top 8, but like through the Swiss, Azorius Control, this list went 7-0, made it to at least the semis. But we're seeing kind of that same package, a little bit cleaner, Ossification, Sunfall, Laydown. Probably if you're looking to go with blue-white control, look at this list over the Azorius Control from the ladder. I think this one's cleaner. Cool card for the mirror. Sorry, not for the mirror. For the ramp matchup is Realmbreaker, the Invasion Tree. You play it out on 3, and then you just start like eating at their. You mill them out. You take their land, so it ramps you ahead. They draw so many cards, so I actually saw like a mill win or close to mill win as an alternative, kind of playing out that matchup there. We had Dimir Control, which was a nice call into the meta, but then ended up running into Mono Red, and just this configuration was not really great for the Mono Red matchup. But we see Hullbreaker Whore, Lier, Chrome Shark main, a bunch of kind of cards that are really good against these mid-range piles. Siphon Insight, take their good stuff, Duress, a bunch of sweepers, but just really was relying on these Phyrexian Flesh Gorgers as the means to deal with Mono Red. We have Dimir Midrange in here, so very similar to the list we saw on the ladder. This version had Misery Shadow in it, so this one was a little bit more akin to like a Mono Black mid-range list. You have your various ramp piles. There's the Dimir Tempo that we saw with like Kaidos in there. Mono Red Aggro had a good showing, at least one list. This one was on the Invasion of Tarkir version. Here he's Warcrafting. And like I mentioned, Bloody Betrayal as a way to steal Atraxas. Jeskai Mindsplice had a 5-2 run, which is kind of cool. There's an Orzhov mid-range list mixed into here. So I'm going to just drop this in. You can take a look, see what goes. If you're interested in playing these, check out on MTG Melee. If you want to see tournament coverage, I have it on my YouTube channel, the top 8, so you can watch all those games in action and kind of get a feel for it as well. That's it for the week. Let me know what you think, what you've been playing, what you've been enjoying. I just hit Mythic in Historic, actually, just now before recording this with Rakdos Midrange. Kind of the list I've been working on all month for the qualifier. Went 32-11 across events, qualifier, and ladder, which I'm happy. You worked on the deck. Unfortunately, 2 of those like 11 losses came in the qualifier and knocked me out, but it is what it is. In any case, thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you have a great one and stay safe out there.